Well, I'll go ahead and give an official good morning to everyone. Thank you for taking the time to sit in on this. I believe it will be both frustrating and beneficial for everyone, as this whole situation is. So thankfully, we have much more knowledgeable people than I on the call this morning to share their insight and what we know at this very moment. Of course, he'll explain that this is kind of an evolving situation, and we're just not sure what all to expect as the timeline moves forward. We might have a few more people join us, but as Greg mentioned first thing this morning, we do have the chat feature available, so please feel free to type questions in there, and we will definitely address those. And I think even later on this morning, Greg will just open it up to the floor. All of you guys are muted, so if you do want to ask your question aloud, if you be sure to unmute yourself. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Greg Norton with Cross Gunner Witherspoon and Gouches. Many of you have heard Greg speak at one of our events before. Big fan of Greg Northam, so I appreciate you being here this morning, Greg. In fact, he's the one that kind of approached us and highly recommended that we do this presentation for you guys. So Greg, just appreciate you always looking out for us and our industry and our members here. So I will let you kick it off, sir.
Well, thank you, Megan. I appreciate that. And for all y'all joining, we appreciate you getting on here. This isn't going to be too long today. It was intended to be just a quick check-in. The last few months, if you're on this call in some capacity, you've been dealing with COVID vaccines in your workforce. I've talked to numerous clients across various industries, and this stuff is a headache for a lot of us. First and foremost, let me start out with saying, a lot's changed since we scheduled this. So as many of you are probably well aware, yesterday a federal judge in Georgia entered an injunction that's enforceable nationwide against the federal contractor, which was the last rule outstanding. So I'm going to walk through what we've gone through the last 60 to 90 days on the vaccine mandates, what we're looking for in January, and then kind of some just kind of like I said, this is just a check-in. I suspect most of y'all have looked at this. If you haven't, now's a great time to look at it. Today, December 9th, was the day after the original deadline to have your workforce mandated, and there was a lot of people scrambling around. That got pushed back to January, and now the whole thing stayed. So it's been a changing landscape. I did this presentation for Truckers Association on Tuesday. Tuesday. And, I told them, I said, the ground under our feet is literally shifting every day. And so this is a moving target. So Bill and I talked, Megan and I all agreed, hey, let's just do this quick check-in. So that's what we're here for today. If you have questions at the end, I'm going to hang around, but I'm trying to get this quick so we can all get back to work. I know it's busy end of the year time for everybody. The executive orders that came out back in September basically said if you're a federal contractor, a federal employee, or a workplace that has 100 or more, even if you're private, you all have to impose some type of vaccine mandate. The OSHA rule issued first. It was an emergency temporary standard. It came out. We went through a lot of webinar trainings. We worked on policies. We've helped clients get ready for that. And then a judge in the Fifth Circuit, which is Texas, issued a stay. And that went into effect nationwide last month. So the OSHA department has since come out and said, you know what, we're just going to not do anything right now. So to the government's credit, some administrations in the past might have said, well, we're going to keep rolling forward. So they haven't with OSHA, and that's good. I'm not going to go through the nuances of the OSHA rule. It is not totally dead. It has stayed. What happened was there was about 24 lawsuits filed initially by various states and private organizations against the OSHA rule. There is a procedural mechanism where the government, when the federal government is sued in multiple jurisdictions, it can pull this lever essentially, and it's called consolidation. They can consolidate all the cases into one. And the way that it works is the cases are all listed, and then one federal judge in the DC circuit oversees this, and they do a lottery where it's kind of a random, like you draw out of a hat essentially, which, I'm learning all this. This has never come up in my experience in the last decade plus of law. So that tells you where we're at right now. They do a lottery where they draw a court out of the 24 who have pending actions, and they draw one. And all the cases are consolidated into one lawsuit. And that's so that the government doesn't have to go in and, defend 24 of the same lawsuits. It makes sense. We don't want to waste taxpayer dollars any more than we already do. So it went into the hat, and the name that was drawn was the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is basically Ohio, Indiana, and kind of the Rust Belt up there. And so, of course, a lot of analysis went into it. And they're going to have the final say on whether the Fifth Circuit's rule is upheld, whether these other courts have since entered injunctions, and some courts weren't going to. So the Sixth Circuit gets to decide whether the OSHA rule moves forward or not. 10 of the last 12 appointees to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals were appointed by Republican presidents. So it's overwhelming Republican appointed judges, and these judges are appointed for life. They don't have to run for re-election. So a lot of experts and analysts believe there is a better than an average chance that the OSHA rule never sees the light of day. If it does come back, if the Sixth Circuit says, you know what, for an ETS is an emergency temporary standard, OSHA has issued this before. They just did this with hospitals. And they said, it's just for 180 days. Well, that's, a big deal when you're requiring people to get a vaccine, in their bodies and they don't want it. So if it comes back, we expect OSHA to give more time to get into compliance, but it will be much quicker than it was the first go round. So again, this isn't something we think you should just throw in the trash, rather put it on the shelf, but you need to get your company where you're ready to go if you're covered by OSHA. If you're a federal contractor, which I know many of you are, and I see a lot of familiar names on here, I know y'all do a lot of big work. If you're a federal contractor who has a covered federal contract with an agency who's distributing funds in excess of $250,000, then you are not covered by OSHA. It's an either or on the rules. A lot of my clients didn't quite understand that, and I didn't either at first, but the rules made clear you're either covered by OSHA or you're covered by a federal contractor rule. You're not covered by both. So the federal contractor rule kept going. And so if you're a covered federal contractor, it still had the vaccine mandate, and it was set to go into effect in January. Or it's already gone into effect. It went into effect December 5th. However, you got until January 18th to have all of your workforce fully vaccinated. The whole goal, they said, was, we want to educate workers, not terminate workers. So they pushed it back. Well, there's a tremendous amount of pushback. I'm sure you all have been saying, we don't want this. Our workers don't want this. We don't want to lose our workers. And it was a lot of uncertainty. Again, there have been some courts issued injunctions around the country against the federal contractor rule, the CMS rule, which is for hospitals. So if some of y'all are working on, let's say, VA hospital projects in Arkansas, if you're on those projects, then the CMS rule would apply to the hospital, and they would then pass it on to you, through your contract. The CMS rule was stayed nationwide a week ago, and now the whole full federal contractor rule has been stayed by a court in Georgia again yesterday. So I was going to talk about that. It stayed. So I don't know that, I personally think, after looking at this for a few months, a lot of legal people believe that there's a better chance for the federal contractor rule to survive the challenge than OSHA, because there's a big difference between being a private business with 100 people. And that's what the court said. The court basically said, why 100 people? Does COVID only target businesses with 100 people? This makes no sense, and we're going to toss it, And so the federal contract, though, when you do business with the government, as all of you who do know, they can throw a lot of strings and tie a lot of red tape around projects. And one of those is arguably vaccine. So if it has a chance of going into effect, probably the better chances for federal contractors. There's a case pending in Missouri right now, which Arkansas, our Attorney General joined in. I was kind of surprised they picked St. Louis, but they did. They know more about it than I do. And so if it follows Georgia, then there's a better chance that we are not going to have it in Arkansas. Now, I know some of y'all have projects outside the state, and so you're going to, right now it's a nationwide injunction, but there are some legal distinctions between an order that you're a part of and then an order that a judge in Georgia says this is effective nationwide. There's going to be challenges. The government hasn't gone away. You know, it's definitely a political smear on their face to get all three rules shut down. And so there's going to be some pushback. How hard, we don't know. So none of these rules have been killed. They've just been stayed through a temporary injunction. And so there's litigation that's going to continue. We are more concerned, if you're a federal contractor, we are more concerned that if an injunction is lifted, then the agency who distributes your funds, the contracting officers on your projects, could say you haven't complied, you're in breach. And it might be, we don't know. They could say, we'll give you more time like the OSHA rule, or they may not. So the best thing I can do, and there's no legal, precedent for this issue. So we're on new territory. The best thing you can do is be best positioned to have crew members that if you have to, if you have crew members who are vaccinated that can fill the positions on covered federal work. If you don't have your teams mostly vaccinated right now, and I'm going to talk more about if your site owners are already requiring it themselves, that's a whole nother issue. But if you can have your workforce kind of teed up and ready to be a little bit more mobile as far as putting them on covered projects, then that might help you avoid being blacklisted for future federal projects. I think that's an extreme reaction by the government to do that, but they could. So keep that in mind. So those are the mandates, okay? That's just my little recap on the mandates. Arkansas legislature, which, hey, we all just got a big tax break. I don't know what you're going to spend yours on, but they had a special session earlier this fall and said that they issued a new statute that goes into effect January 14th. And on January 14th, if your company or if your site owners have a policy that's through their private business, because private businesses you can have your own vaccine mandate. You can choose to require your employees to be vaccinated against COVID, the flu, measles, whatever you want. The law says employers can require that if you want to. But Arkansas legislature passed a law that says you still can have a vaccine mandate, but if you do, you have to, by Arkansas law, you have to offer weekly negative testing in lieu of the shot. So a lot of people don't want the shot. A lot of people want to keep their jobs. So the only alternative is to have a negative weekly test. With ignoring the federal vaccine mandates for now, I've run into with a few clients some situations where a private vaccine policy on an out-of-state project is requiring vaccination and they don't accept weekly testing. And so that's a conflict with Arkansas law. So if you're in that position, you need to analyze whether you're willing to take that risk effective January 14th, or if you want to, and keep the work, or have a discussion with the project manager or whatever, whoever the site owner is, some type of meeting explaining your policy is asking us to violate Arkansas law and seeing if they will comply with that. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you how they're going to address that. And got a question here. All right, Mr. Williams, great question. The question is, and this is where I was heading next, a perfect segue. Thank you, Todd. It says, who do you see having to pay for the weekly testing? Why should the burden be on the employer? Well, I agree that it shouldn't necessarily be on the employer. Here's the problem in Arkansas. we have a statute, and we've had it on the books for a while, that says if an employer chooses to require a background check, a drug test, a medical exam, or any other type of test, or anything that requires cost in order to be eligible for employment. So it's typically on the applicant screening side, right? We have a law that says a business, you can require background checks, you can require drug testing, you can require medical exams. Now there's ADA rules, so I'm gonna let that go, but just be aware. But you have to pay for the cost of the test. You can't require applicants to have to foot the bill for a drug test just to tell them they can't work for you. They say the law says that goes to the benefit of the employer. We have asked the Arkansas Department of Labor for an opinion from their general counsel on whether that conflicts with the new Arkansas law, which says very clearly in black and white ink, the legislature just said that vaccine tests that are done for the weekly negative testing, if you buy them, whether you buy them off the shelf, which I don't know if y'all have noticed them in Walgreens and Walmart. I'm seeing them everywhere. I bought one just to kind of see what they look like. It's kind of interesting to me. But they're out there now. You can buy one at Walgreens or wherever off the shelves, or you can go to a clinic and have a test performed. The legislature in the new law that's effective January 14th says, if an employee chooses to that alternative in lieu of the shot, then the employee has to pay for it. Now, that's somewhat in contradiction to what the old Arkansas statute says, that the employer has to pay for it. So we have asked for an opinion from the Arkansas Department of Labor, who, by the way, the old Arkansas statute, it says in the rule that the Arkansas DOL is in charge of enforcing this. And the reason we're most concerned with that is because it says the penalties are a monetary fine and a misdemeanor, which is, serious. I mean, even though you're not going to jail, you don't want to have a criminal arrest record because you decided not to pay for a COVID test for your employees. So our position is that the new law says that the employees may pay for it. An employer can choose to pay for it, but the employer can also say, no, if you're going to choose this, then you have to provide the cost of the test. And that's what OSHA said too. Because if you recall the OSHA rule that came out, that's now stayed, it allowed businesses to offer negative weekly testing in lieu of the shot. You could do either or and comply with the OSHA mandate. Now, we think your workers are going to get really annoyed with having to go out and get a test. It has to be administered within 48 hours of the week, every week. And if there's a shortage of if they buy it over the counter, they had to come into the work site to administer the test where you can observe it, or you would be breaching OSHA rules, or they had to retain a telehealth proctor to watch them administer the test themselves, basically to make sure people aren't fudging and sticking the swab of their dog's nose or whatever. And that's what OSHA said. Arkansas just says employer may pass the cost of the test, which is what OSHA said too. So the DOL, our position was, well, if under the Arkansas law, the employee is choosing the weekly negative test, the employer is not requiring it. Yeah, do we sound like a bunch of lawyers? Yes, that's what we do. And the DOL has not put it in writing, but they told us, we don't really buy that. So we don't have a clear answer right now on who has to provide the cost of the test. I can tell you, absent that statute, the cost of the test, the one I bought was a 2-pack test, and it was $20-something. So that's a lot cheaper than I thought they were going to be, because when you go through these drive-through labs, that we all did last year and got swabbed, they touched your brain. Those are $100 plus. And now health insurance is saying we're not covering that because, that's millions of tests every week. They're not covering the cost of that. So hundreds of millions of dollars a week in extra revenue loss, the insurance company said, thanks, no thanks. So under their policies, unless you've been exposed, they're not going to cover the cost of the test. So under the Fair Labor Standards Act and the Arkansas Minimum Wage Act, the rule also says it's the same thing with steel toe boots, power equipment, eye goggles, whatever. Any equipment you require an employee to provide, if they have to pay for it, it can't cause their wages to fall below minimum wage. So if you've got guys making them 12, 13 bucks an hour and they're not working much overtime, then, 4 tests a month or, even that 1 test a week might cause it to drop below minimum wage. And that's a wage violation. So those are the 2 factors to consider in determining whether you're going to cover the cost of the test. Some businesses are providing on-site clinics. You can do that. That's a big cost, but it streamlines everything. If you want to have, a van pull up outside your job site and have somebody get out and do all the tests once a week, you can arrange for that. You'll be paying a premium, but you'll do that. Versus having your workers, like if they're on a job site, who do they turn their test into? First of all, the swab that they shove up their nose is now biohazard. So you can't have them throw it on the ground. That's biohazard waste. You got to have some receptacle to collect all that in, something safe like a needlepoint bin. It's technically a medical exam. So if you allow them to do the test at the job site versus at home with a telehealth proctor, although I did tell one client, I think if someone in the company FaceTimed the worker, I think that would pass muster, although that's not the rules anywhere. But that's a big pain for your HR or safety or whoever's going to be responsible for collecting all these tests every week. And the test has to be administered within 48 hours. So it's a logistical nightmare. So I say all that to say, even without we got a few more questions that I'll get to here in just a second. But to put a bow on this, if you've got a job site with an owner or a general contractor who's imposing a mandate through a private policy, Arkansas law requires that you provide weekly alternative testing. I'm hoping that the site owner or the general contractor understands that and flows it down. If they don't, you've got to figure out, can we comply with this and risk, violating Arkansas law? I mean, frankly, if you can't lose your work, you can't lose your work. So you try to figure it out. Your only option is to put vaccinated people on the job site who don't have to provide a weekly test. I mean, and I understand that some of y'all don't have high percentages of vaccinated workers, especially skilled laborers. I get that. It's a chess piece match right now where you're moving your pieces around the board, trying to fill those jobs that are covered versus your regular jobs that aren't covered, and having the right people with the right skills and the right experience doing the job to give the best service you can give on behalf of your company. It's a lot of moving parts that I don't wish I was in any of y'all's shoes. I just got to tell y'all what the rules are. Y'all got to figure it out, right? And that's the hard part, because every situation may be different. All right, let me get to a couple questions here. Who do you see having to pay for the weekly? Cover that. Do you mind addressing how you see this affecting construction work at private healthcare facilities that receive federal funding? Any info you have would be helpful. Yeah, so that ties back to the CMS rule. The CMS rule pretty much covered all the hospitals. The hospitals are under their own OSHA ETS regarding PPE and these ventilators and safety gear and how much they get paid time off. Those are for hospital employees. From what I understand, unless you have a really unique setup, contractors are not covered by that. Your workforce shouldn't be covered by that if they're doing construction services and not healthcare. But the CMS rule has stayed. Now, you might have a hospital that says, hey, we're going forward, because all the hospitals, they want the vaccine, right? And they don't want people around sick people who are unvaccinated, whether you believe in COVID or believe in vaccines or not. I get it. I'm not saying that they work or they don't, but hospitals don't care. They just want to be able to not be sued. And if they do get sued, they say, look, we required everyone to be in our facilities to be vaccinated. So they could, that's the same thing we just talked about with, if you've got a site owner or a hospital administration who's saying, through our own private policy, we are going to require all of the workers from your company on our facility to be vaccinated. If it's in Arkansas, you've got to provide that weekly testing alternative. And they should know that. And hopefully I don't think they want to be in the news for requiring y'all to breach Arkansas law, starting January 14, but you might have a tough one. I don't know. How about the logistics with all of this? The crews don't all report to main office, probably job site, and a crew lead or competent person doing the test, very time consuming. Hey, Todd, I'm with you. I don't have a good answer for you legally. This is more of a pragmatic approach. You're going to have to figure out, like I said, do you want to hire a third party testing administrator who can send a van out and take the swabs at 7:10 muster meeting time every morning? Do you want to have a competent person do the tests? They're going to have to handle the swabs. There's like a 15 to 30 minute wait time on the antigen test to show negative or positive. You're going to have protocols in place that if somebody does test positive, you got to get them off the job site immediately. And then you also got to do contact tracing. You don't want all your people coming down the bottleneck to test at one time, coming within 6 feet of each other for more than 15 minutes, because if they're unvaccinated and one test positive, your whole crew's now out for 10 days. So you need to have some type of protocol set up where you're spacing your workers out. You still want to keep social distance in. You still want to keep face masks on. Face masks are still required for vaccinated or unvaccinated. But for quarantine rules, if you're unvaccinated, you're still going to have 10 days or 7 days after the last exposure with a negative test. And so you don't want to have your whole crew come in on site and risk, having to deal with quarantine issue. That's still a very real concern with the Delta variant. Good news is the Omicron variant looks like it's not as transmissible or harmful as Delta. So that's good. Next question, speak to the subject of employer liability for any side effects, hospitalization, any other detrimental conditions. If vaccine is required to work on specific projects, please. Does it not make the employer liable? Great question, Eric. I dealt with this with the Truckers Association too. They had the same concerns. Early on in the pandemic, Governor Hutchinson made very clear that any injuries or illness due to COVID will be covered by workers' comp. I'm not a workers' comp attorney. You cannot rely on this as advice. You should consult your own attorney. But my understanding is workers' comp would likely cover that injury if it was tied to the vaccine that was a workplace issue. Workers' comp is an exclusive remedy. You need to contact your carrier or the Workers' Comp Commission if you're really concerned about that and get clarification on coverage. But I think it will be covered. If not, could they sue you for negligence or liability for the harm that you imposed on them? They can. I can sue all you people today if I want to go down to the courtroom and file a fee and sue all of you. I can sue anybody. Anybody can sue anybody anytime. Will they win? Probably not. The emergency youth authorization is what the vaccines were mandated. If you go buy one of those tests at Walgreens right now, it says this test is authorized under the emergency youth authorization statute, codified at and it basically says there's a shield of liability immunity when you're in a pandemic. It's now an endemic, by the way, and the only difference means we don't know when it'll ever end. So that's your Thursday morning nugget for you right there. So the endemic we're in, we are authorized to engage in these, the vaccine, but most, definitely the majority of healthcare providers, healthcare experts, the CDC, the Arkansas Department of Health, whether you agree or not, they all recommend vaccinations, and they say that they're safe. So from a liability perspective, that as your defense attorney, I would say, I don't know how someone could say you were negligent by listening to all these recommendations of the medical community and requiring a vaccine. If something were to happen and there was some underlying health condition that you weren't aware of, then, I don't think that they could show that as negligence either, and it would be covered by workers' comp. One thing one of my clients has done is said, you have to get a note from your doctor saying that you're cleared to get the vaccine. They don't have as many employees as a lot of y'all have. So, if you want to get a doctor's note before letting them get the vaccine that you're requiring, you could do that. But that is kind of a pain for your employees, but it's a liability mitigator too. Does HIPAA regs come into play if there is only a few that are being tested on a job site? What if only one on the job site is unvaccinated and is being tested? Can a test be performed in the open? So great question, Alan. HIPAA does not come into play because the test itself is not a medical record and we are not a healthcare provider or a business associate. So HIPAA does not really come into play. That said, the swab itself is a medical examination under the ADA. And so there is an element of privacy. We're recommending you don't do it out in the open. And like I said, you don't want your guys standing on a job site in a circle, looking at each other, breathing on each other, swabbing their noses with their mask pulled down. That's not what we want. So we recommend having some type of privacy screen, some room where they can go in, a bathroom, have a trash bag there that's going to be sealed up and labeled medical waste. Have some type of setup where it's not just, standing around drinking coffee, swabbing your nose and then throwing it in somebody's truck. That's not going to be, if somebody got sick or ill from that, or that would definitely be a workers' comp issue because you're going to have, exposure issues with those test samples. So those are the kind of rules you want to have in place right now before January 14th. So if the federal mandate comes back, if the OSHA mandate comes back, ABC, Arkansas, I'll get with Bill. We'll do another training on exactly what you have to have because the rules for OSHA have been very specific. If you're a federal contractor or if you're under the CMS, for whoever that was that asked about working with hospitals, then if those rules come back, then you're going to have specific things to require. The only thing you'll have to comply with right now going forward, the only thing legally you'll need to worry about is, well, for vaccination policies, the only thing you need to worry about is, do you have to offer a weekly negative test? And starting January 14th, you do, without any federal rule that would preempt that. And then two, what are your protocols going to be for those employees who select testing in lieu of the shot? And I suspect, based on my conversations with many of your companies, I suspect it's going to be high. You can also decide you can differentiate between workers based on vaccination status. That is a legitimate business issue. So you are free to take guys off of job sites or put ladies on another job site that are vaccinated to mitigate that risk. You can do that. It won't be retaliation or discrimination as long as it's legitimate. And, workers may not like it. You can still encourage vaccines. I know a lot of you don't want to, but, if it helps business operations where you can continue doing your work uninterrupted, then that's for the best of the company. If not, just make sure you have testing protocol set up and an ability for your workers, to kind of be more flexible. Like I said earlier, one of the things the OSHA rule required was having a roster of your employees who are vaccinated and not vaccinated. And they also require proof of vaccination. There were standards for that. That's not required right now, but honestly, just talking through this with clients over the last 3 months to the point of, I never want to hear the word variant again. But if you have that roster in place, you will be able, that's a confidential document. I'm not saying pin it to the break room, notepad or bulletin board. That's a confidential record that should be maintained by upper management or HR or safety or something, where you have a list of employees that you have proof of vaccination already in hand. And that way you can, if you need to make a quick, be more nimble in reassigning workers, that's not a bad thing to have. And you don't have to go around and ask everyone, give me your vaccine card. I want to see your vaccine passport. Don't do it that way. Just ask your department leaders to reach out to their teams or divisions, whoever it is, and say, look, if you've been vaccinated and you want to bring your vaccine card to us, we're going to maintain a roster of all persons who have been vaccinated. We'll maintain it as confidential. It's not going to be discussed. But if things keep trending down like they have been, and we get through the holidays and this dark winter everybody talks about, which I don't get because the numbers went down last winter too. If the numbers keep trending down, then this spring you might be able to take those face masks off if you've been vaccinated. Because if you don't recall, OSHA came out in August with a set of rules And these rules are still in effect. If you haven't got on the OSHA Safe Workforce website for COVID, there are a set of rules for vaccinated workers and a set of rules for unvaccinated workers. And those rules allow, well, they're temporarily stayed thanks to the Delta variant, but we think the rule will go back to, if you've been vaccinated, you don't have to wear a face mask. And frankly, that's one of my biggest things. I hate those things. That's an incentive to me to get vaccinated if you're on the fence. Now, if you have a big objection to it, that's fine, but I will tell you one other thing before I wrap up, and then I'll go over the last couple of questions. The one other thing is, if you recall, last year, the governor issued a business immunity shield through one of his executive orders. And this spring in session, the legislature codified it now that we have a statutory immunity as businesses from liability related to COVID transmission. So people can't come in and sue you because they got COVID in your business. If, and that's a big if, I'll send you the statute if you want it. Email me after this. I'll send it to you so you can read it yourself. It's only 2 pages. It's an easy read. But it says you would not get the business immunity shield if you are not in substantial compliance with health directives from the state of Arkansas. And by the way, the Arkansas Department of Health and the governor's orders relating to COVID do incorporate some CDC guidelines, including face masks indoors. So like you can go online right now and go to the Arkansas Department of Health. They have a indoor event guide sheet, and it has a list of about 30 something things that you need to check off. If you're going to have a Christmas party inside your office, if you want to follow the Department of Health guidelines, if you don't follow the Department of Health guidelines, you probably won't have that immunity shield. And does that mean you'll lose? No, but that immunity shield is a big bone thrown to businesses that says, if I come in and sue you, I can get a lawsuit against most of y'all tossed if you have that if we can show that you complied with Department of Health guidelines. So I get nobody wants to wear their masks. Trust me, I'm one of them. But you need to understand, if you're an owner, if you're a manager, if you're in charge of safety, your organization's more at risk if you don't enforce, at least indoors, at a minimum the indoors, but also in vans and trucks if they're traveling. There's OSHA rules you can still get fined for, and you might lose that business immunity shield. So those are big things. Those are risk. That's a great risk avoidance to have that liability shield. All right, I'm going to follow up with the last few questions and wrap up, because I told Bill 30, 45 minutes ought to be enough. And that was without going over the federal mandate. So like I said, and I don't want to bind Bill or Megan here, but if things change in the future and we decide that there needs to be one of these follow-ups, we'll certainly be available to do that. All right, let's see here. Oh, there's a lot more questions. Kirk, get out of here, man. Get out of here. All right. Could this be borderline on a discriminatory issue in the future? That's a way bigger rabbit hole than I'm willing to go into right now, Corey, but the short answer is not right now. Not right now. You can, like I said, you can differentiate between unvaccinated and vaccinated workers. You don't have to like it, but you can from a business decision. For unvaccinated, isn't there the option for antigen testing showing natural immunity in lieu of weekly testing? Yes, thank you. Mark, that's a great point. The Arkansas statute says you have to provide a negative weekly test or proof, and we don't know what that would be, proof of natural immunization. Basically, we think if you can get a doctor's note that says, hey, this person's had COVID in the last 60, 90 days, so they are safe, then, we don't want to encourage people to run out and start, licking door handles to try to get COVID so they don't have to do this for 90 days, right? There's a balance here. But yes, the legislature did put that into place to where you could have that as an option in lieu of the negative weekly test. So good question, Mark. If the courts keep the OSHA mandate out, any word on class action lawsuit for all the loss of business and work that construction companies lost? Yeah, Don, great question. No, the government's immune from class actions for loss of business. especially when it's related to public safety. So I like where your heart's at. Good idea, but no, that's going to be a loser. I don't think any lawyers are going to take that on. In my professional opinion, where do we see this ending up after all is said and done? Corey, my man, if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be at work today, all right? I'd be on a beach somewhere sipping Mai Tais, telling people what's going to happen. I don't know, and it would be reckless for me to give a professional opinion on that. I think that there's a good chance the federal mandates stay dead. I think there's a good chance states, like I don't know if y'all saw, New York City has now imposed a private business vaccine mandate. If Chicago, LA, I'm not even going to say Portland or Seattle, but, Kansas cities, some of these areas, Memphis, if some of these areas blue cities start following that lead, it might impact your job sites. So you got to keep an eye on local mandates too, because cities do have a lot more control over their city than the federal government does. There's a big constitutional barrier that the federal government can cross sometimes and cover nationally. But right now, the states and the cities have more authority, I think, in these regards. So in Arkansas, we're probably not going to have more than what we have right now, with our current governor and what I will give you my professional opinion of who I think the next governor is going to be. I feel pretty good about that. I think either way, we're not going to have a big push towards any type of governmental control. So I think we're kind of where we're at. I could be wrong. So I don't think that COVID's going away. There's going to be future variants for sure. The Omicron variant actually it's hugely positive that it hasn't been as harmful to folks. There's been fewer hospitalizations, and it's not as transmissible as Delta. And that's what some scientists have predicted, that every new variant, as it develops in human bodies, is going to be, hopefully the body finds ways to fight it. And it's kind of like the common cold. The common cold used to kill thousands of people, or hundreds of thousands of people. Well, our bodies now, like, we get the sniffles. So it develops over time. I've heard one opinion that COVID may go that route. That said, if the next variant starts killing children, then we're going to probably go into a massive lockdown. Like, if we have kids dying at the rate that sick and elderly were dying last year, and vaccines don't work against it, then no governmental official can stand over, a hospital bed with a dying child and say, you know what, it's your choice. That I think that there's going to be tremendous pressure, and we'll probably see some real strict, crackdowns. Now, vaccines aren't working against it. What are they going to do? I don't know. So again, I'm not at the beach. I'm here. I'm in my office. I'm not happy about it. But Corey, that's the best I got for you. That's my time. Like I said, I've already gotten a couple of emails from y'all. I'm happy to answer questions. ABC Arkansas, I don't know if you saw the email Bill sent out. ABC National was a huge victory. They led that lawsuit that got the federal contractor rule stayed. So y'all's involvement in ABC Arkansas helps keeps ABC National going, and this organization fights to keep y'all from having to deal with these burdensome regulations. And kudos to ABC National. So we'll keep an eye on everything. Bill, do you have any follow up or anything? Megan, you need to close out with?
No, Greg, great job. I appreciate you giving the plug there to ABC National, because everybody that's on this call is an ABC National member. Whether you're an ABC National member through your membership in Arkansas, or maybe you're an ABC National member through your membership in another state. So I always like to point out when we have those victories to let everybody know that legislatively what we do is probably one of the biggest things that we do, is just trying to protect our members and their ability to do work. So great job, Greg.
All right, y'all have a good holiday and hang in there. We'll maybe be back, we may not. We'll see. Thanks, y'all.